Tom, I asked a question last half hour about Canada's decision, of course, to expel the Chinese diplomat. We know tit for tat now, Chinese consul or Canadian consul general is being sent home. And I asked, and it was sort of difficult to figure an answer for this, if this was the best decision we could have made. So what do you think?
Well, it came too late. Mm-hmm. It came after Mr. Trudeau's very timorous interventions where he emoted in front of the cameras about how worried he was about enforcing Canadian law because he was afraid of vengeance from China. So I don't think it was a particularly good moment in his tenure. I think that Trudeau's got a lot better stuff than that. But I still can't understand, and everybody's trying to speculate on what the real reason is why the Trudeau Liberals have been so weak in dealing with China. And I think that we're going to find out when we finally get a commission of inquiry.
And this whole line, Canada will not be intimidated, but to me it showed that they were intimidated out of the gate by stalling on it.
He was trembling in front of the cameras. Mm-hmm. He was terrified of doing anything, as was, by the way, Mélanie Joly. Now, is it just that the people who run the Foreign Affairs Department are so weak that they communicate that to the government, that they have to be very worried? But if you're going to be worried and you're just going to be trying afterwards to say, well, we're going to stand up, well, then maybe you should not exactly say right into the microphones that you're really worried about what China can do to you.
People, when we bring up the idea of economic sanctions on other globes, I'm sure this will be the headline in a lot of Canadian papers, waiting for that next shoe to drop, and that will be in the way of economic retaliation. Should we be concerned?
Well, we've already been through it with them. For reasons known only to the Chinese, all of a sudden, out of the blue, they invented a problem with Canadian canola, of all things. Oh, and they said, there was too many impurities in it. They had to start turning it back, even though it was the exact same product that they had been importing for years. And then we went through it with Canadian pork. So they're always going to try to choose things that can hurt local markets and probably hurt the government as much politically as possible. Because, of course, where are pork farmers concentrated in Quebec? Well, largely in the east, mostly here in Quebec. And where are you going to find canola? Well, you've got the Western farmers who've got those massive tracts of land growing, big crops like canola. So, yeah, they're going to do everything they can to hurt the current government. But I'm not sure they're going to do any better if they wind up by accident or by design bringing in Pierre Poilievre.
Well, that's a good point. All right, let me ask you about this. We haven't talked about this at all today. I was watching some of the coverage on this on TV today. Danielle Smith, she has said some pretty crazy things, but then this idea of comparing vaccinated Albertans to followers of Hitler, that's way over the line. And her excuse, Tom, was, well, she didn't say it now. She said this when she was doing a radio show, so that shouldn't count.
Exactly. So as everybody knows, people who do radio shows say crazy stuff all the time, so that excuses anything, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm nodding my head, Tom. Yes.
No, but is this the end of the line? I mean, how does she?
How do you get out of this?
From here?
Yeah.
Well, she's got 2.5 weeks left, almost 3, until her election. And she's going to have to try to come up with other stuff to make people forget this. I think that the NDP showed a lot of restraint in holding on to this because, of course, they've had it for a while. You can be sure of that. And instead of letting it out last week, which they could have right at the beginning of the campaign, they were going through terrible wildfires. The public was really worried about that and had no time for political shenanigans. All of a sudden, the colder weather comes in, the rain comes, things are a little bit more under control, and boom, somebody drops this thing into the public space. It was brilliantly well done. And, one of the things about a political hit like this, it's like Trudeau in blackface, right? How many times did you get dressed up in blackface? And really, was this all part of your costumes? And so there was no good answer for Trudeau on that, and that's why he wound up losing his majority when that came out during the 2019 campaign. And here it's the same thing. I mean, the NDP won a miraculous election 2 cycles ago, 8 years ago, when Rachel Notley's NDP was facing an almost perfectly split right wing in Alberta, right? You had the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservatives, and you had Danielle Smith's Wild Rose. And they tore each other apart as much as they could. And who went up the middle? The NDP with Rachel Notley. Nobody would have ever guessed that the NDP could form a government, although Rachel Notley's dad, Grant Notley, tragically killed in a plane crash. But he was probably the only person who had ever come anywhere close to doing that in the past. So it's the same thing this time around. I think that she's been pitch perfect. Rachel Notley has. She's just said, look, this is inexcusable. There's no possible way to explain this away. And she's right. And the question then becomes, is it going to be enough? Or does the average Albertan sort of go, you know what, we're like Americans. They love Trump because he's a little bit bonkers, and we kind of like Danielle Smith because she's a little bit bonkers too, and she says crazy stuff, but then she apologizes for it, so we can still vote for her.
Or their ideologies align with that. Like they think, oh, good for her for saying the stuff that we're maybe afraid
God,
to say.
no. Let's hope that's not the case.
Well, I mean, it's clear that the people of Alberta are like the people across Canada, and the vast, vast majority of them went out and got vaccinated because that's what everybody in the medical profession was saying. If you want to give yourself a fighting chance against this horrible disease that is COVID-19, why don't you go get yourself vaccinated? And that's what most of them did. But the crazy fringe in Alberta seemed to be a bit more hard baked than in other provinces, and she was surfing on that. That's what she was trying to do on her radio show. Fair enough, there are tons of examples of that over the years, but there are not tons of examples of people then trying to become the premier of their province. She said stuff that is essentially comforting the Russians in their invasion of Ukraine. She's come out on the side of the Russians, and guess what? There are hundreds of thousands of Albertans with Ukrainian roots, and none of them are going to vote for her. So she's been busy throwing as many votes as she can into the wastebasket, and despite the fact that the calculus looked quite grim, because instead of facing a perfectly split right wing, Rachel Notley was facing a very united right wing, but now I think that a lot of people are going to be staying home, and a lot of people are going to be coming out to vote for the NDP.
All right, let me shift this to something local. We've been trying to get her on the air. I don't know if we'll succeed this week or not. So the new head of the MUHC, Dr. Lucio Paterny, we learned about her, of course, when the CAC was calling those regular press conferences. Now she's the head of the MUHC. And then all of a sudden I read this today and I'm thinking to myself, okay, she's on board with Christian Dubé's health reform. She's heading up the MUHC, but she's warning of what might happen at the same time based on that reform with people who will maintain their seniority without having to travel all across the province, the fact that they're going to want to stay closer to home, which kind of is like shooting yourself in the foot in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, I read that, but I'm still scratching my head over it, because if somebody is working in the MUHC right now and they're allowed, they're traveling to work, so theoretically they live close enough to their work, so it's not going to change anything if they have their seniority. I mean, is that person going to move to St. Jerome tomorrow morning? I don't think so. So I get the theoretical concern, but I'm not convinced that there's a practical concern there beyond the theoretical idea that people might be able to have a bit more movement. And guess what? When you know what happens with bureaucracies generally, giving people the ability to move is a really good idea.
Yeah, Tom, I could be wrong here. My takeaway from her comments were that imagine, and I think she said this, people who live off island, right, who commute into the city to work within the MUHC, maybe if they get to hold their seniority, will end up working out where they live, and therefore we're not going to have enough people in the city to do those jobs.
Yeah, but when you know how the bureaucracy works, you have to have a position that opens up in that other place. You can't just walk into Cité de la Santé or into the St. Jerome Hospital or the St. Agathe Hospital and say, oh, by the way, I'm working here from now on. There has to be an open position there, and you have to apply for it, and you have to qualify for it.
But I'm guessing there's understaffing everywhere. I'm guessing that probably isn't the biggest concern. And when the health minister said, I'm open to making changes or amendments, I thought, wow, that's kind of, interesting in the sense that she said something and he's on board with it.
Yeah, well, on board. He's agreeing with anybody right now who doesn't disagree with him, because he just had a wonderful set-to with Dr. Amiot, the head of the general practitioners here in Quebec, who's always been a fly in the ointment for decades, this guy. And so ask anybody who's ever had to try to work with him, and they'll tell you the same thing. So, Legault sent in Christian Dubé because he's an experienced guy, and Dubé was going toe-to-toe with this guy Amiot today. I've never seen a health minister have the guts to take on Amiot, because that's what it's going to require. So if Opaterny is in there saying, give this some consideration, be careful, he's going to say yes, but he's not going to move away from his basic idea that you've got to provide more and not less fluidity and mobility to people who are in the healthcare sector. It becomes, it really becomes frozen. And if you open it up a little bit, you give people better chances to move around, it's going to help.
Okay, there you go. Tom Mulcair back tomorrow morning with Andrew Carter. Thank you, Tom.
Talk to you tomorrow.